So one of the things that I get asked a lot by fellow Christians, um, by acquaintances, friends, co-workers, neighbors, things like that, family members is, gosh, Todd, why are these things so important to you? Why do you fight so much against the prevailing culture and against the things that are happening? And there's a ton of different reasons. But I don't think that anything that motivates me on a personal, relational level is more important to me than my granddaughter. She was born 3 months ago, and I look at her and I think to myself, this is why I fight. That precious little granddaughter of mine is why I fight. I don't want her to grow up and inherit a nation where her skin pigmentation, her melanin count is used against her to accuse her of the great original sin of leftist Marxism and social justice and intersectionality. That white privilege original sin. I don't want her to have to live with that. That she's just automatically wrong because she's white. And I know there are a ton of people out there who would say, well, I grew up in a culture where I was wrong all the time because I was black, or I was Asian, or I was Hispanic, or I was brown, or whatever terminology. But that's not what we should be fighting for. We shouldn't be fighting to flip the table, or flip the script, if you would. So now, instead of that particular thing being the sin, that particular skin pigmentation or melanin count is the sin, it's now a sin to be white and possess white privilege. A mythical, farcical, theoretical lie. White privilege isn't a thing. But my granddaughter should not grow up in a world that is going to teach her to hate herself for nothing more than having been born white in the United States. I fight for her freedom. This isn't just about the current Marxist insurgency that's happening in the United States. This is about the tyrannical uprising in the United States, where we see governors and mayors and different county administrators and county boards enacting just terrible policies and procedures and uttering edicts that are absolutely destructive to the American way of life. So I want her to grow up in freedom. And there's nothing wrong with that. And the people that sometimes push back the hardest on me in this are Christians. Oh, you talk so much about freedom, but the Bible isn't about freedom. In a constitutional sense, that's true, but and you don't want to go out on a limb and misquote scripture, but freedom is the natural God injected drive in humanity man strives for liberty. Man strives for freedom. Now, some people strive for freedom from any influence that God may have over their lives, but that particular drive, as sinful as I believe it to be, according to scriptures, doesn't mean that every drive towards freedom and liberty is bad. And so I want her to grow up in freedom because, one, as a Christian, I'm a realist. As much as I will pray for my granddaughter's conversion, she may not be a Christian. I want her to be, but she may not be. And so I still want her to have freedom. That's why I fight. I fight so that she can grow up in a truly colorblind society, and I know that today that's considered the height of white supremacy and the height of white privilege to say, I want people to live in a colorblind society, but I will point back to the flawed, but in some respects very great Martin Luther King Jr., who said, I long for a day where people will be judged not based on the color of their skin, but on the content of their character. That's what I'm striving for. That's how I judge people. I don't judge them based on their outward appearance in the sense of what they look like. I don't judge people based on their skin color. I judge people based on their character. That's what we should be striving for here in the United States. And we in the United States are particularly gifted towards that end because the Constitution, which our founding fathers, as flawed as they were, in wisdom and intellect, left us. They left us with the very tool that makes it possible for all of us to be equal. We're not all going to have the equitable outcome in life, but we're all gifted with the opportunity to pursue equality. And we all have an equal amount of opportunity. And I know it probably sounds easy for me to say, but it's not. I've had to fight against a system my entire life that was geared towards keeping me down because I don't have the same level of education as many people. I don't have a bachelor's degree or a master's degree or a doctorate or in anything. My parents weren't wealthy. My parents were not movers and shakers in the community that I grew up in. We were poor, for lack of better terminology. We were subsistence living. Paycheck to paycheck. Week after week. I often lived on hand-me-downs from friends and family members as far as clothing. And I didn't have all brand new, brand name clothing that a lot of the other people that I grew up with and went to school with had. So, yeah. But I still had the opportunity to work and strive to have a different life. Just like my parents fought and scrimped and eventually crawled out of that lifestyle. Well, we weren't trash, but we didn't have a lot. But my parents made it. And my dad, when he died, wasn't a wealthy man, but he was a respected man. And he had learned how to provide for his family. And my mom carries that legacy forward today. I want her to have the freedom of speech, which so many people are working to strip anyone who dare counter the argument against the prevailing Marxist insurgency. have stripped from them. People are fighting for that. They're fighting to take away your ability to disagree with what's going on in society today. Whether it be the Marxism of the Black Lives Matter movement or the Marxism of the Antifa movement, which is aligning itself with the Marxist of the Black Lives Matter movement, or the Marxism that's taking place in states like Minnesota and Michigan and Ohio and Illinois and Kentucky, North Carolina and Virginia, and over and over again. California, New York, New Jersey. There are Marxists in so many positions of power. I want her to be able to have the freedom of speech that people like Cuomo and even my own governor would strip from us. They would silence us if they could. And they're working that way. They're making things now hate crimes if you speak out against a particular movement. Consider Gavin Newsom's California, where a couple was just arrested for a hate crime for painting over a mural that said Black Lives Matter. Now the mural wasn't on private property, it wasn't on somebody's house, they didn't tread on private property, and there's a level of illegality to their actions, but it wasn't a hate crime to paint over a Black Lives Matter mural any more than it would be considered a hate crime for, I don't know, somebody to deface a statue of Stevie Ray Vaughan in Texas during a riot. So, where's the equity there? Where's the equal treatment under the law there? So I want her to have the freedom to speak. Now, as her grandfather, I'm going to strive to teach her to treat people with respect. And you know what? Her mother and her father will do that even better than I do, because my daughter and my son-in-law are incredibly respectful people. They do not harbor hatred in their hearts towards anyone that I can tell. And they will raise my granddaughter with civility and respect for others. But she's probably going to grow up having opinions that are counter to the prevailing winds right now. That doesn't make her hateful. And she should be free to speak those things, and so that's why I fight. I fight for that. I fight so that she can be a wrong thinker in our society today. I fight for her to be able to think for herself and to say, why should I have to stay at home? Why should I have to isolate? Why should I have to self-quarantine? Why should I have to wear a mask? Why should I have to bow in front of certain people because people who share my skin color at some point in the past did something wrong? That she should have the freedom to say that, and she should be protected in that, and it should not be a crime, and she should not be labeled hateful for saying those things. So I fight for that because I would want somebody to fight for me in that way. I don't want her to have to worry about being hauled off to a re-education camp for being a wrong thinker. And make no mistake, that is being talked about in many circles in the United States today. People are talking about that. They're talking about teaching people to think the right way. What's that even mean? And would you want your child hauled off? Let's say you're a rabid new atheist and you absolutely despise Christianity and Christians and Christian thought. Would you want somebody to haul your child off or your grandchild off for not thinking the right way and forcing them into a Christian education camp? Maybe you're a Marxist, and maybe anti-Marxism wins the day, but you continue to maintain your Marxist mentality, and would you want your family members hauled off and forced into a republic-loving camp where they're forced to not think like Marxists and they're taught to not think that way? I would fight to the death for your people to not suffer that kind of injustice. So no, I don't want her to have to worry about being hauled off to a re-education camp in the future for wrongthink, because she dared to utter a word that is innocuous in its meaning, but has somehow been twisted to mean something other than what it was meant to be. And yeah, to some degree I fight so that the ideas of Marxism and leftism, progressive leftism, are destroyed. I want them destroyed. I want those ideas destroyed. Not in a violent way, but I want them destroyed through intellect and thoughtful discourse. I want them destroyed, as should any freedom-loving person. Any movement, whether it be actual Gramscian Marxism or social Marxism, if you will, or the social justice movement or the Black Lives Matter movement, they're all Marxist, and I want them, through intellect and through thoughtful engagement, I want those ideas eradicated. I do. I want them absolutely destroyed. I want them done away with. They're, again, not in violence or in hate, but because they're dangerous ideologies that don't help anybody. They don't help anybody. They will simply be tools used to destroy the American way of life for all people. Not one particular ethnicity, not one particular skin color, but for all people, those ideologies will come in and they will destroy the American way of life if they're allowed to fester and become infected into our culture. I fight so she can read good books, so she can read classics like the works of Mark Twain, so she can read books like The Great Gatsby and others. There were tons of books out there that were written at a time that things in this country were not equitable or fair for a lot of people. But those books are classics of literature. They shouldn't be canceled, and people shouldn't be forbidden from reading them. Those books shouldn't be burned. I despise book burning. I despise Christianity that feels like it has to burn CDs and records and tapes and certain books. I just as much despise any Christian movement that would burn a Harry Potter book as I do the idea that a statue should be torn down because it's of someone else who maybe was on the wrong side of the war. I hate that kind of culture. I hate that. I despise it with every fiber of my being. I study history. I look at history and I learn about history so that I can warn her and others, don't make these mistakes. And I do that, and I fight because of what I study, so that she can study history, unredacted history, so she can study all of it. Not just the comfortable parts, but the bad parts too. So she can learn about the ugliness of the American people at times and of humanity in the world. We can't just rewrite history so that only one particular segment of society is made to look ugly and the rest is all made to look beautiful and upright and just. I study history for those reasons, so that she can study it and others like her can study it. As I recently said in an essay, Sir Edmund Burke made it very clear that those who do not know history are destined, or as I prefer to say, doomed to repeat it. When you start to rewrite history, when you redact history, You are setting culture, you're setting society, you're setting a civilization up to repeat the sins of the past. And sometimes those sins will look exactly the same, or in the case of South Africa right now, the sin of apartheid is being met with its own genocide now. Because the people have forgotten the sin of apartheid, because it's been, that part of history has been stripped away. And what hasn't been stripped away, they're using to justify the wickedness of genocidal murder against whites in South Africa, and no one talks about it. We have to turn away. We can't look at it. And so I fight for that, so she can know history for her own good and for the good of the people around her and for the good of society and culture and for this great nation. I fight because I love her. And I want her to continue to have the same freedoms that every other American has. They're not granted by the Constitution. They're enumerated in the Constitution. They're natural rights granted by God. And so that's why I fight. And make no mistake, any threat that comes her way, that threatens her safety, that threatens her liberty, that threatens her security, I will fight to neutralize, to eliminate. Any threat. And I think it's safe to say that anybody who loves their children, or loves their grandchildren, or their great-grandchildren, would fight the same way. Yeah, that's why I fight. That's why I will not back down. I've lived my life. Chances are I'm not going to be hauled off to a camp. Chances are I'm going to, as long as I live, even if it's another 15, 20 years, however long God sees fit to keep me around, I'm probably not going to see a total eradication of everything that has made this country great, but we're not far away from it if the radicals and the Marxists and the progressive leftists that make up movements like Antifa and the Black Lives Matter movement, if they win, they will destroy this nation. And I'm fighting against that. And I have friends of every ethnicity that are fighting this fight alongside of me. And if this makes me a radical, if this makes me dangerous, I would rather be dangerous and free than safe and passive and enslaved by Marxist ideology. I will not turn that country over, or turn my granddaughter over to a nation like that. And you shouldn't want to do that either. So fight with me. Engage your intellect. Stop emoting. Bring your emotions into subjection to the intellectual nature of thought. And fight the right way. Engage people who disagree with you. Do not be afraid to lose things, because if you lose things now and fight the fight well, you may be saving those things for future generations. That's why we should all fight. Because right now it's not about us anymore. It's about our offspring. Black, white, Asian, Hispanic, any mix thereof, any combination thereof in this once great melting pot we call America, we should all be fighting that good fight against the enemies of the United States, against those who would destroy the Constitution, and against those who would enslave wrong thinkers. So that's why I fight. It's for her and others like her of her generation. As always, thanks for watching the video. Thanks for being open-minded. Thanks for listening. I would ask that over here in the corner, somewhere on your screen, you hit the subscribe button. It's important, not for me, but because mainstream media, legacy media, isn't going to get the word out. They're not going to let people who don't toe the established line speak. So for the sake of liberty and for the sake of the defense of this nation, small little independent voices like mine need to be heard, especially the interviews. It's got very little to do with my commentary and a lot more to do with the interviews and the people who are affected when liberties are tread on. So once again, hit the subscribe button, like, subscribe, and share. Thank you very much.